My name is Celina. I'm 31 years old, and 2 years ago, my colleagues stole my project, my promotion, and my pride, while the entire room applauded him. They called it teamwork. I called it betrayal. Today, I walked back into that same office, not as his coworker, but as his boss. And the best part? He has no idea what's coming next. I've always been the type who believed that hard work speaks for itself. I wasn't the loudest person in meetings, nor the one constantly seeking validation from the higher-ups. I preferred to let results do the talking. At Ridgeway Tech, where I worked as a project manager, that attitude had carried me far, until the day it destroyed me. For months, I'd been developing a concept for a mobile app that could streamline internal data across multiple platforms. It wasn't just a task from my boss, it was my passion project. I spent late nights perfecting every detail: user flow, interface, and on the presentation slides that would showcase it to the executive board. I believed it could change the company's future, and maybe my own. But there was one problem: Bryce. Bryce was my colleague, slick, charming, and effortlessly confident. He knew how to talk his way through anything, even when he barely did the work. Everyone loved him. I'd seen him take credit for small group efforts before, but I never imagined he'd target me. The day before the big presentation, my supervisor stopped by my desk, glanced through my slides, and smiled. "Celina, this is brilliant. Make sure you lead the meeting tomorrow. This is exactly what the board wants." I barely slept that night from excitement and nerves. When morning came, I walked into the conference room clutching my laptop and notes. Bryce sat across the table, looking smug as usual. I didn't think much of it until the meeting started, and I heard the words that froze my blood. "Good morning, everyone," Bryce began, clicking through my slides. "I've been developing a new project idea that I think can revolutionize our internal systems." At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. I stared at the screen, my color scheme, my layout, even the same tagline I'd written. My throat went dry. He kept talking, describing every single detail of my work like it was his own. Every line, every diagram, every insight, he'd stolen it all. The executives leaned forward, impressed. My boss nodded approvingly. Laughter filled the room as Bryce cracked one of his usual jokes, and the whole team applauded when he finished. I couldn't breathe. "Bryce," I finally said, my voice trembling, That's my project." The room went silent for half a second, and then Bryce smiled casually, not missing a beat. "Of course, Celina helped," he said smoothly. "We collaborated on the details." My jaw dropped. "Helped? Bryce, I built this entire proposal." But before I could finish, my boss interrupted. "That's great. Teamwork, you two. This is exactly the kind of collaboration we encourage." Everyone nodded. Some of my coworkers gave me sympathetic looks but didn't say a word. I could see it in their eyes. They knew, but none of them wanted to get involved. Bryce basked in the praise, acting like the hero. My hands were shaking under the table. Every ounce of pride, every late night, every bit of effort I'd poured into that project vanished in a heartbeat. After the meeting, Bryce patted my shoulder with that infuriating smirk. "Don't worry, Celina. There's enough success to go around." I wanted to scream, to expose him, to make everyone see the truth, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. In that office, perception was everything, and Bryce had already won. I packed my things quietly and left early. No one stopped me. No one even asked if I was okay. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the steering wheel. My hands clenched so tight they hurt. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't cry from sadness. It was rage. I'd given that company everything. My ideas, my effort, my loyalty, and in return, I was invisible. That night, as I stared at my reflection in the mirror, something inside me shifted. I whispered to myself, steady and cold, "Fine. If he wants to play dirty, I'll learn the game, and I'll win it." I thought I could fix things by being honest, but honesty meant nothing in a world that rewarded lies. The morning after Bryce's theft, I walked into the office with a quiet determination. I told myself that if I just explained everything, showed the evidence, the drafts, the timestamps, someone would listen. Someone had to. I wasn't the kind of person to make accusations without proof, so I gathered everything. The original slides, the document history, the email I'd sent him weeks ago asking for feedback. Every line of code, every comment, every traceable file had my digital fingerprint on it. I scheduled a meeting with HR that same afternoon. The woman in charge, Ellen, smiled politely as she motioned for me to sit down. Her tone was rehearsed, overly calm, the kind of voice people use when they're preparing to dismiss you. I laid out my case, explaining how Bryce had accessed my files, copied my work, and presented it as his own. I even pulled up my version history and showed her the timestamps that predated his proposal. When I finished, there was a long silence. Ellen nodded, her hands folded neatly on the desk. "Celina," she said finally, "I understand this must be upsetting, but from what you've described, it sounds like a collaborative project." "Collaborative?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "He stole everything. Every single thing I created." She sighed sympathetically. "The company values teamwork. It's not always easy to separate individual contributions." That's when I realized this wasn't about fairness. It was about convenience. They didn't want drama. They wanted things to stay smooth, quiet, and controllable. By the end of the week, I received the news that made my blood boil. Bryce had been promoted. He was now officially the lead strategist for my project. The announcement email went out to the entire company, praising his innovation and leadership. I stared at the message for a full minute before closing my laptop. I wanted to quit. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I showed up to work the next day and the day after that. Bryce, now my superior, started assigning his workload to me. "You're just so good at this," he'd say with that infuriating grin. "You don't mind helping out, right?" He'd stroll out early, leaving me to clean up the mess he made. I noticed every mistake he made in implementation: wrong data links, broken processes, oversights that would cost the company time and money, but I bit my tongue. Correcting him publicly would make me look bitter. Staying silent would make me look weak. So I chose a third option. I watched, I learned, and I planned. One afternoon, while I sat alone in the break room staring at the latest progress report, Rowena approached me. She was one of the senior analysts, older, sharp, and quietly observant, the kind of woman who'd seen it all. "You're taking this hard," she said softly, setting her coffee beside me. I nodded. "He took everything, and no one cares." Rowena leaned in slightly. "Then stop trying to make them care. Build something they can't ignore." Her words stuck in my mind like a spark waiting to ignite. That night, instead of crying myself to sleep, I opened my laptop again. I began creating my own system, a new idea, different from the stolen project, but built on everything I'd learned. I started documenting everything, every meeting note, every file transfer, every idea. I saved backups on encrypted drives and cloud servers. I made sure nothing I created could ever be claimed by someone else again. I also began studying. I enrolled in night classes, leadership, business strategy, advanced project management. I wanted to understand not just how to work, but how to rise. Week after week, my resentment turned into motivation. My exhaustion turned into focus. I watched Bryce get comfortable in his undeserved role, making all the wrong moves, while the higher-ups stayed blind to his incompetence. I smiled to myself when he bragged about his success in the cafeteria, surrounded by people who laughed at his jokes but whispered behind his back. I didn't need to destroy him. Not yet. I just needed to keep building quietly until I was strong enough to make my move. One night, long after everyone had gone home, I passed by Bryce's new office. His nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Bryce Danner, lead strategist. I stood there for a long time, the glow reflecting off the glass door. Then I whispered to the empty hallway, my voice low and steady. "One day, I'm going to see my name on that door, and when I do, you'll remember exactly how you got yours. If no one would open a door for me, I'd build my own damn door." I learned something vital in those months after Bryce's promotion. Waiting for fairness was a waste of time. Justice wasn't handed out. It was built, brick by brick, by people willing to get their hands dirty. So I started building. I knew I couldn't beat Bryce or the company from within. They'd already chosen who to believe. But outside those glass walls, there were people who had seen my work, clients, partners, and contacts, who remembered the way I'd handled projects before Bryce ever showed up. Quietly, I began reaching out. During lunch breaks and evenings, I'd reconnect with clients I'd worked with in the past. "Just checking in," I'd say casually. Most of them remembered me. A few even mentioned how they missed working with me because I actually listened. That meant more than they realized. Little by little, I began helping them solve small problems off the record, offering insight, suggesting software tweaks, even troubleshooting performance issues that their in-house teams couldn't figure out. I didn't ask for payment. I just wanted to prove my worth on my own terms. And it worked. Word started spreading. Not inside Ridgeway Tech, but in the wider circle of professionals who knew the industry. Rowena noticed my quiet side hustle and, instead of scolding me, pulled me aside one day. "There's someone you should meet," she said. That someone turned out to be Anthony Graves, a senior executive at a rival tech firm. He was sharp, observant, and didn't waste words. Rowena introduced me at a small industry mixer, and I could tell he'd already heard of my work. "I like people who build without permission," he told me after our brief chat. "Let's keep in touch." That single sentence changed everything. Over the next few months, I began consulting part-time for Anthony's company, just small freelance projects, but each one taught me something new. I learned about business operations, contracts, budgets, and the messy human side of management. I was no longer just a project manager. I was becoming a strategist. Every time I completed a project, I added it to a private portfolio I built under my own name. No company branding, no cosigns from Bryce or anyone else. Just me, my work, my proof. Of course, Bryce noticed. Somehow he got wind of what I was doing. I suspected he'd been snooping through the shared company files again because suddenly he was bragging about new strategies that sounded suspiciously like mine. He even presented one to the board, twisting it slightly so it looked like his idea. For a moment, I felt that old anger rising again, but instead of reacting, I smiled. Let him think he was still winning. What Bryce didn't realize was that I had already outgrown him. I wasn't chasing approval from our boss or HR anymore. I was chasing knowledge, power, and independence. At night, after finishing my consulting work, I started preparing something bigger, my MBA application. I poured every success, every metric, every personal project into that essay. I wanted the admissions board to see me not as an employee, but as a builder. When the acceptance letter arrived, I sat at my desk and just stared at it, unable to move. I'd been awarded a full scholarship to one of the best business schools in the state. I'd done it, on my own. For the first time in years, I felt free. I stopped worrying about what people at Ridgeway thought of me. Bryce could have his little title and his empty praise. I was already moving beyond the walls that confined me. During that time, I started noticing something else. My energy changed. I walked into the office differently. I didn't flinch when Bryce called my name across the floor or when my boss dumped more work on me. I'd learned to keep my head high and my secrets close. No one there knew about the calls I took after hours or the projects I managed outside their bubble. They had no idea how much stronger I'd become while pretending to stay small. And then one night, as I was packing up my things after another long day, I noticed a new email notification pop up on my screen. The subject line read, "Potential investment opportunity, confidential." At first I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, my pulse quickened. It was from a private investor who'd seen my recent consulting work through one of Anthony's referrals. They were interested in funding my next project idea. I stared at the glowing screen, heart pounding, realization sinking in. This wasn't just a chance to escape Ridgeway. It was a chance to build something of my own. That night, I looked out at the city skyline through the office window and whispered, "If no one will let me in, I'll build the door myself, and I'll decide who gets to walk through it." He laughed when I quit, but he shouldn't have. 700 words. Hook. When I handed in my resignation letter, Bryce smirked, thinking he'd finally won. He had no idea what was coming next. By the time I decided to quit Ridgeway Tech, I was already gone in every way that mattered. My mind, my heart, my ambition, they'd all outgrown that place. The company had become a cage, and I was done pretending I couldn't see the bars. For weeks I'd been preparing quietly. Every contact I'd built, every document I'd written, every trace of my real work was carefully stored away in encrypted folders. I deleted everything else, anything that could be used, twisted, or stolen. I wasn't going to leave breadcrumbs for Bryce to follow. When I finally printed my resignation letter, my hands didn't shake. It felt like signing my own freedom papers. I walked into Bryce's office first. He was sitting there like a king on his throne, his feet propped up on the desk, scrolling through his phone. When he saw the envelope in my hand, he smirked. "Let me guess," he said. "You're leaving?" "Yes," I replied simply. He leaned back, pretending to look sympathetic. "I can't say I'm surprised. Not everyone can handle the pressure here." I held his gaze. "Pressure isn't the problem, Bryce. The problem is people mistaking theft for talent." His smirk widened. "You'll never make it without this place, Celina. The real world doesn't care about idealists. You should have learned that by now." I wanted to tell him that the real world was exactly what I was heading toward, and that it cared a lot more about integrity than he ever would. But instead I just said, "Good luck keeping your project afloat." Then I turned and walked out. When I handed my letter to HR, they barely looked at it. No one asked me why I was leaving. No exit interview, no acknowledgement, just another email update in the system. That was the moment I realized how small I'd been to them, how replaceable, and instead of feeling hurt, I felt powerful, because they'd underestimated me one last time. I packed up my desk in silence. Rowena came by to hug me goodbye. "Don't look back," she whispered. "You're not losing something. You're making space for something better." And with that, I left Ridgeway for good. The next year was a blur of long nights, risk, and relentless effort. The investor from that mysterious email turned out to be legitimate, a venture capitalist named Marcel Dupree, who believed in my vision for transparent project management software. With his seed funding, I launched my own startup, NovaTrack. My goal was simple but personal: to create tools that protected creators from having their work stolen or misrepresented. Every function, every feature was designed to make accountability non-negotiable. I started small, just me, a rented co-working space, and a dream. But soon I began hiring, not the brightest names from fancy universities, but people like me. Women who had been overlooked, silenced, or underestimated. Coders who'd been told they weren't leadership material. Designers who'd had their work credited to someone else. We became a family of fighters. Our first prototype wasn't perfect, but it was solid. Within months, it caught the attention of small businesses tired of office politics and lost credit. Then the media picked it up. An article titled, "The App That Makes Office Betrayal Impossible." That headline made me laugh and cry a little too. Before long, NovaTrack was being talked about at tech expos and industry panels. I started getting invited to speak about ethics and innovation. And the irony? Many of those events were sponsored by Ridgeway Tech. The first time I walked onto a conference stage with my company logo glowing behind me, I felt my heartbeat echo through the mic. Cameras flashed. My name, Celina Ward, founder and CEO of NovaTrack, appeared on the screen in bold letters. I began my talk about transparency, leadership, and protecting intellectual property. As I spoke, I scanned the audience. Faces blurred together under the stage lights, until one didn't. In the third row, sitting perfectly still, was Bryce. For a second, I thought I was imagining him. But no, there he was, older, more tired-looking, his smile gone. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw something new in his expression. Not arrogance, not confidence, fear. I didn't flinch. I finished my speech with a calm, steady voice that carried through the hall. When the applause started, I held my head high. As the crowd rose to their feet, Bryce stood too, frozen, staring up at me like he was seeing a ghost. And all I could think was, "You laughed when I left, but now you're watching me rise." When the applause ended, Bryce walked up to me, his voice shaking for the first time ever. The conference hall still hummed with applause when I stepped down from the stage, heart racing with a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. Flashbulbs burst around me, reporters hovered near the exit, and I could hear people saying my name like it actually mattered now. Celina Ward, founder, innovator, visionary. I had spent years waiting to be recognized for my work, but the validation didn't come from a boss or a title. It came from building something that no one could steal. I was about to leave the stage area when I saw him moving toward me through the crowd. Bryce. He looked smaller somehow, The confident posture, the easy swagger, both gone. His hair was thinner, his suit a little rumpled, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Celina," he said, voice hesitant. That was impressive. It was the first time I'd ever heard uncertainty in his tone. I smiled politely, keeping my expression neutral. "Thank you." He shifted awkwardly. "It's good to see you doing well." I didn't respond right away. I wanted him to feel that silence, the heavy space where he used to hold power over me. Finally, I said, "It's been a long road." He nodded, glancing away. "Yeah, things at Ridgeway aren't great right now." I already knew. The industry buzz was impossible to miss. Clients were leaving, frustrated with delayed projects and poor oversight. The once powerful company was bleeding slowly, and Bryce's name was often mentioned as part of the problem. But I didn't gloat. I just said, "I'm sorry to hear that." He looked at me then, almost searching my face for something. Sympathy, maybe, or forgiveness. But I'd moved past needing either of those things. "I guess you were right," he said quietly. "About accountability. It does matter." I met his eyes and replied evenly, "It always did. You just never valued it." He swallowed hard, gave a stiff nod, and walked away. Watching him go, I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just closure. The kind of peace that comes when you finally realize your revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about proving that you didn't need them to succeed. Later that evening, while I mingled with other business leaders at the networking reception, a group of executives approached me. I recognized a few of them immediately. They were from Ridgeway Tech. "Ms. Ward," one of them said, shaking my hand with visible respect, "we were really impressed by your company's growth. Novatrak's approach to project transparency is exactly what the industry needs." I nodded, listening carefully. Another added, "Frankly, we could use leadership like yours. Ridgeway's had some challenges lately." It was almost surreal. The same company that had dismissed me, ignored me, and promoted Bryce over me was now looking at me like a potential savior. "I appreciate the compliment," I said, keeping my tone professional, "but my plate's pretty full." They exchanged looks, clearly disappointed, but handed me their cards. "If you ever consider collaboration, our doors are open." I slipped the cards into my bag without comment. They didn't realize it yet, but the power dynamic had completely shifted. Back at Novatrak, things were better than I'd dared to imagine. We'd secured 2 major contracts that directly competed with Ridgeway's core services. Our platform was being adopted by mid-sized firms across the country. Each new client meant another quiet victory, another nail in the coffin of the company that once overlooked me. And Bryce? His name began appearing in whispers. Industry blogs, anonymous forums, performance reviews leaked to the press. Words like incompetent, unreliable, and poor leadership. The same people who once laughed at his jokes were now distancing themselves. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't have to. His own arrogance was doing the work for me. One night, after a particularly long day, finalizing a new partnership, I got an email notification that made me pause. It was from Ridgeway Tech's board of directors. Subject: Partnership Proposal, Novatrak Integration Opportunity. I opened it carefully. The message was formal, flattering, and strategic. They wanted to collaborate, or rather they needed to. Their internal systems were failing, and they believed Novatrak could help them recover. But buried beneath the corporate language was the real kicker. If I accepted, I would be placed in charge of overseeing Ridgeway's restructuring efforts, including Bryce's division. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The irony was almost poetic. The man who once told me I'd never make it without Ridgeway was now unknowingly handing me the keys to his own cage. For a long moment, I just sat there, letting the reality sink in. Everything I'd built, every late night, every failure, every ounce of anger, had led to this point. I wasn't just successful. I was in control. I closed my laptop slowly, whispering to myself, if I say yes, Bryce won't just answer to me. He'll work for me. 2 years after he stole my idea, I walked through the same glass doors, not as an employee, but as the new division head. The air inside Ridgeway Tech still smelled the same, a mix of coffee, toner, and quiet ambition. But this time, as the elevator doors slid open, the reflection staring back at me in the polished chrome walls wasn't the same woman who'd once cried in her car after being betrayed. That woman was gone. I was no longer the overworked project manager waiting for permission to matter. I was Celina Ward, CEO of NovaTrack, and now, by contract and strategic partnership, the new division head of Ridgeway's Project Strategy Department. The partnership deal had taken weeks to finalize. Ridgeway's board had practically begged me to accept after a string of financial setbacks. I didn't buy the company outright, yet, but I'd acquired majority control over the department Bryce led, the same department that once buried me. When I stepped through those glass doors, whispers rippled across the open office floor. Heads turned. People leaned in to murmur behind their hands. Is that her? Didn't she used to work here? I heard she runs her own company now. Their surprise didn't faze me. I walked with steady, deliberate steps toward the executive suite where Bryce was standing, frozen beside the conference room door. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Celina, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're the new division head, I finished for him, extending a hand with a calm smile. Good to see you again, Bryce. He didn't take my hand right away. His fingers twitched, uncertain. Finally, he forced a tight grin and shook it, his palm clammy. The irony was delicious, but I didn't let it show. Inside the conference room, the tension was thick enough to taste. The senior staff sat around the table, the same people who'd once watched silently while Bryce took credit for my work. Now, their eyes darted between us, unsure how to act. I placed my tablet on the table and began the meeting with a composed, steady tone. First, I want to thank everyone for welcoming me back, I said. I know this department has gone through challenges. That's why I'm here, to rebuild and to set a new standard for how we operate. I paused, letting the silence stretch. From now on, this division will run on merit, accountability, and transparency. No one's ideas will be buried, no one's work will go uncredited, and no one will advance by stepping on others. The statement landed like a quiet explosion. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I saw Bryce flinch ever so slightly. I continued, outlining a detailed plan for restructuring, clearer project ownership logs, open access performance metrics, and a rotating leadership review system. Every policy I proposed was a direct counter to the manipulative culture that had allowed Bryce to thrive. To their credit, most of the employees looked relieved, even hopeful. They'd seen the chaos that followed Bryce's promotion. They were ready for change. Throughout the meeting, Bryce sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. The confident smirk he used to wear like armor was gone. He looked ordinary. When I adjourned the session, polite applause followed. I thanked everyone and began gathering my notes. That's when Bryce approached me. He waited until the room cleared, then closed the door behind us. Celina, he began, forcing a chuckle. I'll be honest, this is unexpected. I glanced up, saying nothing. I just want to say, he continued, rubbing the back of his neck, I'm sorry for what happened before. It wasn't personal. You know how company politics work. I tilted my head slightly. Company politics? He nodded quickly. Yeah, I was under pressure. The bosses back then, they wanted results, and I just took a shortcut. You would have done the same in my position. No, I said evenly. I wouldn't have. The silence that followed was heavy. He avoided my gaze, pretending to straighten a stack of papers on the table. I mean, he muttered, I'm glad things worked out for you. Really. I folded my arms. Things didn't work out, Bryce. I made them work. He finally looked up at me then, his expression a mix of regret and fear. So what happens now? Do I still have a job here? For a moment, I let the question hang in the air. It was the same kind of silence he once used against me, the silence that made people squirm. Then I smiled faintly, stepping closer so he could see the calm certainty in my eyes. That depends, I said softly, on how honest you can be. His jaw tightened. He didn't have an answer. As I walked out of the room, the whispering began again, only this time, the murmurs weren't about Bryce's rise. They were about mine. For the first time, Bryce wasn't in control, and I watched him unravel. A week after I took charge of the division, I scheduled a private review meeting with Bryce. The invitation was formal, polite, and vague, just the way corporate meetings usually looked before someone's world started to crack. He arrived 5 minutes late, trying to play it cool. "You wanted to see me?" he said, leaning against the doorway as if we were still equals. "Yes," I replied, motioning for him to sit. "Close the door." He hesitated, then obeyed. I watched him carefully as he settled into the chair across from me, still wearing that faint smirk that used to make me doubt myself. Only this time, it didn't intimidate me. It just looked hollow. "I wanted to discuss something that's been on the record for a while," I began. "Specifically, your past conduct regarding project ownership and intellectual property." His expression twitched. "I'm not sure I understand." "You will," I interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. He opened it, and for the first time since I'd known him, Bryce went pale. Inside were emails, drafts, and timestamped documents, all neatly organized, all dated from 2 years earlier. My project, my proof, the digital fingerprints he thought I'd buried along with my pride. "You kept all this?" he muttered, voice cracking slightly. "I keep everything," I said calmly, "especially when it matters." He flipped through the pages, his breathing quickening. "Celina, come on, this was years ago. You're really digging this up now?" "No," I said softly. "I'm closing it." He looked up at me, eyes darting nervously. You're not going to show this to the board, are you?" "That depends," I replied. He blinked. "On what?" "On whether you're ready to be honest." The silence that followed stretched for several seconds. I could almost see the war happening behind his eyes. The instinct to lie, to charm, to manipulate, battling the realization that none of those tricks would work on me anymore. Finally, his shoulders slumped. He exhaled, long and shaky. "Fine," he said. "You're right. I took it." The words came out barely above a whisper. "I needed a win," he continued. "My numbers were slipping. The higher-ups were on my back. And you made it look easy. You had all these ideas and no one even noticed you. I thought, if I just used one, I could fix my reputation. I didn't think it would blow up like that." I studied him for a long moment, letting the confession hang in the air. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet but steady. "You thought stealing my work would save you, but it just delayed the truth. Integrity isn't optional, Bryce. It's everything." He swallowed hard, looking away. "What do you want me to do?" I slid another document toward him, a resignation. "You have 2 choices," I said. "You can sign this and walk away quietly, or I can open a public audit of your projects. Either way, your career here ends today, but this way, you keep a shred of dignity." He stared at the paper for a long time, jaw tight, eyes glassy. The man who once gloated about knowing how to play the game now looked like he didn't even understand the rules anymore. After a long pause, he picked up the pen. His hand trembled slightly as he signed his name. When he slid the paper back to me, I nodded, taking it without another word. That moment, the quiet click of the pen on the table, felt like a door closing forever. He stood, trying to salvage a trace of pride. "Guess I deserved it," he said, his voice brittle. "For what it's worth. You were always better at this than I was." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He left my office slowly, not looking back. I watched him walk down the hallway, his once confident stride replaced by something small, hesitant, human. When the door finally shut behind him, I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the air in that building felt clean. But the calm didn't last. My phone buzzed. It was an urgent call from one of our key clients. I answered immediately, expecting a routine update, but the tone on the other end made my stomach drop. "Celina," the voice said, tense and hurried. "We've got a problem. The new contract, the one that's supposed to launch next month, it's at risk. Something's gone wrong with the integration, and if it fails, it could take both our companies down." I froze, the weight of the moment hitting me all at once. I just closed one chapter, but the next storm was already forming. I stared out my office window, the city lights reflecting in the glass, and whispered to myself, one battle down, a whole new war to fight. I'd won the battle, but victory came with its own storm. Power looks glamorous from the outside. the title, the corner office, the attention. But once you're inside it, you realize it's not a crown, it's a weight. After Bryce's resignation, the department fell completely under my leadership. At first, it felt like freedom, the justice I'd fought for finally achieved. But almost immediately, the cracks began to show. The news of Bryce's departure spread faster than wildfire. Employees whispered about how I'd taken him down. Rumors twisted the truth until the story wasn't about hard work or integrity. It was about revenge. Competitors started to spin the same narrative. Articles popped up online calling me the woman who destroyed her rival to rise to power. At first, I tried to ignore them, but the whispers started reaching higher places. Investors who had once admired my determination now looked uneasy. In meetings, I caught them exchanging glances when my name was mentioned. One of them finally said it out loud during a quarterly review. "We admire your drive, Celina, but some of our partners feel your leadership style may be emotionally motivated." Emotionally motivated, as if passion and accountability were weaknesses, as if being betrayed and surviving it somehow made me unfit to lead. And inside Ridgeway, I could feel the tension too. Some employees, especially those who had been loyal to Bryce, treated me with careful politeness, but I could sense the distrust beneath their smiles. To them, I wasn't their new leader. I was the woman who had toppled their old one. I tried to balance firmness with fairness, but it was harder than I expected. Every decision was questioned, every change scrutinized. I started doubting myself again. The same creeping insecurity I'd felt years ago began whispering in my ear. One evening, after a brutal day of back-to-back crises, I found myself dialing an old number. "Rowena," I said when she answered, my voice cracking slightly. Her laugh was warm, familiar. "I wondered how long it would take before you called me from your fancy office." "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted. "Every step forward feels like another fight. I thought winning would feel better than this." Rowena's tone softened. "That's because you're still thinking like someone who has something to prove. You don't owe anyone a performance, Celina. Leadership isn't about revenge, it's about responsibility. Forgive without forgetting, and lead without looking back." Her words hit deeper than I wanted to admit. That night I stayed in the office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at the glowing city lights below. Maybe Rowena was right. Maybe I'd been leading from fear. Fear of being doubted, dismissed, or replaced. So, I made a decision. If I was going to lead, I'd do it on my terms, not as a vengeful survivor, but as a builder. The next morning, I called a department meeting and announced the creation of a mentorship initiative for women in tech, a program designed to support and protect employees who felt unheard or unseen, just as I once had. At first, the room was quiet. Then, one by one, people began to nod. I saw something shift. The skepticism in their eyes started to fade, replaced by respect. Over the next few months, the program took off. Women from across departments signed up. Productivity rose. Team morale improved. Even a few of Bryce's former supporters began volunteering to mentor newcomers. And then came the contract crisis, the one that had nearly collapsed the company when I got that call weeks earlier. The integration errors were traced back to a third-party vendor. My team panicked, but I didn't. I gathered everyone in the boardroom and said, "We'll fix this together. No blame, no panic, just solutions." It took 72 sleepless hours, but we did it. The system went live on time. The client renewed their partnership and doubled their investment. That victory wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about unity. The press changed their tune. Headlines shifted from "The Avenger Executive" to "The Leader Redefining Corporate Integrity." Investors came back on board. For the first time, Ridgeway's reputation, and mine, stood on a foundation of respect, not rumor. I should have felt completely satisfied. And yet, that night, as I sat alone in my office, surrounded by success, a strange unease crept in. A courier had dropped off an unmarked envelope earlier that evening. I hadn't paid attention to it until now. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature, no logo, just one typed sentence. "You've become everything you once hated." I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. Was it a threat, a warning, or worse, The truth? I set the letter down, my reflection flickering in the window's glass. For the first time in years, I didn't know if I was the hero of my story anymore, or just another villain in disguise. That letter made me question everything, but it also reminded me why I started this journey. For days, I couldn't get that anonymous letter out of my mind. You've become everything you once hated. The words echoed in my head every time I stepped into a meeting, signed a deal, or stared at my own reflection in the office glass. At first, I brushed it off. Anonymous letters were part of the territory now. Power attracted critics. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just an accusation. It was a mirror. Because in some ways, they were right. I'd fought so hard to climb out of the pit Bryce had thrown me into that I hadn't noticed the walls I'd built around myself, every decision I'd made, every risk I'd taken, every victory. It all circled back to one thing: proving them wrong, proving him wrong. Revenge had been my fuel, but somewhere along the way, it became my identity. That realization hit me like a wave. I'd built an empire, yes, one grounded in ethics, integrity, and fairness, but also in quiet anger. And anger, even when justified, was a fragile foundation. That night, I stood by my window overlooking the city skyline. The same skyline I used to dream about when I was the invisible employee sitting at a shared desk. I thought about who I was then: hopeful, idealistic, and hungry to make a difference. And for the first time in years, I missed her. So, I made a decision. It was time to stop fighting ghosts. The next week, I called a full board meeting for both NovaTrack and Ridgeway's integrated division. We've spent years competing, I told them, but competition without purpose is hollow. From this point on, our mission isn't just innovation, it's empowerment. They listened as I outlined a new initiative, a global mentorship program for women in technology, one that would not only train future leaders, but also fund scholarships for those who couldn't afford higher education. Every ounce of bitterness that had once driven me started transforming into something else: purpose. Within months, the Ward Leadership Scholarship launched. Applications poured in from all over the country, young women with big dreams, determined to break barriers the way I once had to. Seeing their essays, their determination, their belief in something better, it healed something inside me I didn't realize was still broken. A few months later, my alma mater invited me to speak at their annual leadership summit. The same lecture hall where I'd once sat as a nervous student, taking notes on how to succeed in business, now had my name on the program as keynote speaker. As I stepped onto the stage, the lights were blinding, but the sight of hundreds of young faces staring up at me made my chest tighten. They weren't just students. They were the next generation, the ones who'd inherit the world we were shaping. I took a deep breath. When I started my career, I began, I thought success meant proving people wrong. I thought revenge was justice. But all revenge does is keep you tethered to the pain that started it. A hush fell over the room. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't hold back. I was betrayed once, I said, voice trembling just slightly. Someone stole my work, and I spent years trying to make sure no one ever underestimated me again. And I did it. I built something powerful. But I also lost sight of peace. Don't make that mistake. Build not from anger, but from purpose. Let your success be your proof, not your punishment. When I finished, the applause didn't come immediately. Instead, there was a moment of silence, the kind that comes when words truly land. Then, one by one, the audience rose to their feet. Afterward, a young woman approached me, clutching her scholarship acceptance letter. "Ms. Ward," she said softly, "your story is why I didn't give up." That moment broke me open in the best way, because I saw myself in her, the old me, the one who started this journey not for revenge, but for recognition and respect. A few weeks later, clips of that speech went viral online. Headlines shifted again. From betrayal to empowerment, how Celina Ward redefined success. My inbox filled with invitations to panels, interviews, and mentorship collaborations. But what mattered most wasn't the praise. It was the quiet sense of peace that finally settled in my chest. Bryce's name faded into silence. He left the industry altogether, a forgotten footnote in stories that no longer revolved around him. As for me, I wasn't chasing anyone anymore. I wasn't running from my past. I was walking toward my future on my own terms. One evening, I sat alone in my office, the city glowing beneath me, and I finally understood. I hadn't taken revenge. I'd taken back my life. Revenge built my empire, but forgiveness made me whole. In the end, I realized revenge wasn't my victory. Rebuilding myself was. Bryce vanished from the industry, but I didn't need to watch him fall to feel whole. I'd already risen higher than he ever dreamed. My empire was born from betrayal, but it thrived on integrity. And that's the sweetest revenge of all. Success that no one can steal. If my story moved you, don't forget to share it. Maybe someone out there needs to hear that justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated, and subscribe for more stories of women who refuse to stay silent. Because sometimes silence isn't peace. It's preparation. Tell me in the comments, if someone stole your dream, would you fight to take it back or build something even greater instead?